When the first human ships appeared in Coalition space, many survivors could not believe what they saw. Their designs were plain, almost crude compared to the elegant ships of the older civilizations. Some of their hulls still bore signs of patchwork repairs, scars of earlier battles or accidents. To the eyes of the proud Coalition, these newcomers looked like amateurs who had wandered into a storm far greater than they could handle. At the Council of the Last Stars, where the remaining leaders of the Alliance gathered, debates erupted. "They are too late," said one ambassador, her voice heavy with despair. "Our fleets are destroyed. Our worlds are gone. What can these newcomers do? They do not even understand the enemy." Another spoke with bitterness. "Humans have lived in isolation, far from the center of the galaxy. They know nothing of war on this scale. To invite them into this fight is to throw away the last fragments of our survival." But there were others who listened carefully to the humans' words. Though their ships were not shining, and though their technology seemed modest compared to the oldest races, there was something in their voices that stirred attention. They did not speak like the others. They did not tremble or hesitate. They spoke with steady determination. "We know the enemy is strong," the human commander said during the first council meeting. "We know that many of your people have already fallen. But if we remain divided, none of us will survive. If we stand together, we may yet find a way." His words did not promise miracles. They did not deny the fear. But they carried a weight that many had not felt in years. Courage. Even so, trust did not come easily. The Coalition had been betrayed by hope too many times. They had believed their fleets were unbeatable until the Kethar crushed them. They had believed their defenses could hold until their walls were torn down. Now they were asked to believe in a young species they barely knew. The first test came quickly. A small refugee convoy was trapped on the edge of a dying system, hunted by a Kethar raiding force. The Coalition had no ships to send. They whispered that the refugees were lost. But before the silence could fall again, the human fleet moved. Their ships did not glide with beauty. They charged forward like spears, engines burning hot, shields trembling under fire. Instead of fighting in neat formations, they broke apart, weaving and twisting in ways the Kethar had never seen. They set traps, created false signals, and lured the enemy into ambushes. What should have been a simple slaughter turned into chaos. In the end, the convoy escaped. For the first time, Kethar vessels were forced to retreat, not from overwhelming power, but from confusion and resistance they had not expected. The humans returned battered and scarred, but victorious. News of the rescue spread across the surviving worlds. Some still doubted. "They got lucky," critics said. "The enemy underestimated them. Next time, they will be destroyed." But others felt something they had not dared to feel in a long time. Hope. Among the refugees who had been saved, a young alien child asked his mother, "Who were those people in the strange ships?" She answered with quiet wonder, "They called themselves human." The Coalition began to watch more carefully. Humanity's fleets were small, their weapons simple compared to ancient arsenals, but their methods were different. Where others followed tradition, humans improvised. Where others feared sacrifice, humans accepted it. Where others despaired, humans carried stubborn fire. Over time, the survivors realized something. Humans were not just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for everyone. They gave away supplies to worlds they had never seen before. They took on missions no one else dared attempt. And when questioned about why they risked so much, their answer was always the same: because someone called for help. Still, not everyone welcomed them. Some leaders feared that humanity's involvement would only bring greater destruction. Others envied the respect they were beginning to earn. Tensions rose at council meetings, arguments turning into shouts. Yet through every debate, the humans remained calm. Their message unchanged: unity or extinction. The second test came at the Battle of Valar's Gap. A Coalition outpost there guarded a critical trade lane, and though most of its defenses were already destroyed, a small group of defenders held on. The Kethar arrived in overwhelming numbers, determined to crush the last resistance. Once again, the Coalition declared the battle hopeless. "We cannot waste more ships," said one commander. Better to abandon the outpost, but humanity refused. They launched their fleet, even knowing the odds. Their ships arrived late in the battle, engines burning at full power, weapons already heating from strain. They fought with reckless energy, darting between enemy formations, creating openings where none had existed. Coalition defenders, inspired by this sudden arrival, joined the fight with renewed strength. For hours the battle raged until finally the Cathar were forced to withdraw. Valar's Gap still stood, scarred but unbroken. The outpost commander, who had expected death, sent a message to the council. "We live because the humans fought beside us." From that day, whispers changed. Where once there had been doubt, there was now cautious respect. Humans were not the strongest, but they were something the galaxy had almost forgotten. Fighters who refused to bow to despair. Children on refugee worlds began drawing human ships on walls. Survivors told stories of the newcomers who had arrived when all others had turned away. And though many leaders still argued, deep down they all knew something had changed. Humanity had brought with them not just weapons, not just strategies, but something far more powerful. Hope reborn. The months after Valar's Gap were not easy. The Cathar did not stop their advance. They came in endless waves, burning through systems, leaving only silence behind. Many believed the humans' victories were only temporary, sparks in a storm too great to control. Yet every time the enemy attacked, humanity was there, standing where no one else dared. The coalition had once been proud, with fleets that stretched across the stars. Now it was scattered, reduced to fragments of once great powers. The survivors had grown used to despair, used to the idea that no matter what they did, the Cathar would always win. But then the humans arrived. And wherever humans fought, something strange happened. The Cathar did not always win. One of the first true signs came during the defense of Iridon, a mining colony that had already been half evacuated. When Cathar warships entered the system, the remaining colonists prepared for death. Yet the humans did not abandon them. They set their small fleet in orbit, blocking the path of ships far larger than their own. The battle was uneven. Human vessels were struck, shields collapsing, hulls breaking. But instead of retreating, they pushed forward, ramming enemy ships, boarding them, and turning the enemy's strength into chaos. Marines in simple armor stormed Cathar vessels, tearing apart control systems with improvised explosives. Entire crews were lost in desperate charges, but the colony was saved. News of this spread like fire. Species that had given up hope began to whisper again. "The humans fight like no others," they said. "They risk everything for worlds not their own." The coalition counselors could no longer ignore it. Humanity was proving not only brave but effective. Their unconventional tactics, ambushes in asteroid fields, false retreat maneuvers, sudden surprise attacks, confused the enemy. The Cathar were built for order, for overwhelming strength and predictable battlefields. The humans were chaos. They broke every rule and somehow it worked. Still, victory was never easy. Losses mounted. Whole crews disappeared in the void, never to return. And yet, when the casualty lists were read, there was no hesitation. More humans volunteered, more ships were launched. "We fight because others cannot," they said. "If we stop, everything stops." The turning point came during the Battle of the Shattered Belt. The Cathar had been using an old asteroid mining field as a staging ground, preparing to strike deeper into Coalition space. The Coalition declared it lost, too dangerous to reclaim, but the humans saw an opportunity. "Let us try," said Admiral Reyes, the human fleet commander. "If we take the belt, we cut their supply chain. They will falter." Many on the council doubted. "It is impossible. Too many enemies, too much risk." Reyes only answered, "Then we will do the impossible." The battle began with silence. Human ships drifted into the field, hidden among the rocks. They cut engines, moved only with small thrusters, and waited. The Cathar, expecting no resistance, moved freely. That was their mistake. The humans struck without warning. Mines hidden in asteroids exploded. Decoy signals lured enemy ships into crossfire. Boarding parties used hollowed-out rocks as cover, bursting forth when least expected. The belt became chaos, every shadow a trap. By the end, the Cathar had lost more ships than ever before in a single battle. The belt was scarred, burning, but it belonged to the Coalition again. Humanity had shown the galaxy that the enemy could bleed. For the first time, a cheer spread across the refugee worlds. Not whispers, not quiet hope, but voices raised in defiance. "The Cathar can be stopped," they cried. "Humanity has shown us the way." But victory came at a price. Entire human squadrons had been lost. Families back on Earth and its colonies received messages of sorrow. names carved into lists that seemed to grow longer every day. Yet when asked if it was worth it, survivors only answered, yes, because we are still alive. The coalition began to change. Inspired by humanity, species that had once hidden began sending what ships they had left. Engineers worked side by side with human crews, learning their strange, bold tactics. The galaxy, once divided by fear, was beginning to unite again. Still, the Cathar were not finished. If anything, they grew more determined. Larger fleets appeared, pressing harder, testing the humans' strength. And though victories were won, the humans knew they could not hold forever. They needed something more, a plan that could end the tide instead of merely slowing it. One night, as the human commanders met aboard the flagship Horizon, the conversation was heavy. "We are running out of time," said Captain Nadir. "The Cathar adapt. They are already changing their tactics. We cannot keep surprising them forever." Admiral Reyes nodded. "Then we must strike where they least expect it. Not their fleets, not their outposts, their heart." The room fell silent. To attack the core of the Cathar network was unthinkable. No one had ever dared. It was deep in enemy space, defended by countless warships. To reach it would mean almost certain destruction. But Reyes only looked around the table and said, "If we cut off their heart, the body falls. If we don't, we will die slowly anyway." The commanders exchanged glances. Fear was there, yes, but also something stronger. They had seen what humans could do when told something was impossible. Perhaps, just perhaps, this too could be done. Thus began the planning for a mission unlike any before. A strike not of defense, not of desperation, but of defiance. A mission to show the galaxy that even in the face of endless darkness, humanity would not bow. Back on the refugee worlds, word of the plan spread quietly. Many thought it madness. Yet even those who doubted felt something stir in their hearts. For too long they had lived in silence and fear. Now for the first time they saw a species willing to gamble everything, not only for themselves but for everyone. The galaxy watched. The Cathar advanced. And humanity, standing at the edge of defiance, prepared to leap into the unknown. The Cathar were relentless. Every system they attacked burned. Every fleet they encountered shattered. The coalition had grown stronger in small ways, inspired by humanity's courage, yet their forces were still scattered and fragile. Humanity had proven that even the smallest, most unconventional tactics could yield results, but now they needed more than clever maneuvers. They needed a decisive strike. Admiral Reyes stood on the bridge of the flagship Horizon, looking out at the vast emptiness of space. Stars glittered coldly against the black, a beauty that seemed indifferent to the suffering of the galaxy. His officers worked at their stations. Maps of enemy positions projected in holographic light. Each red blip marked a Cathar vessel, each larger than the humans' combined fleet. The numbers were daunting, yet in the silence of the bridge no one spoke of fear. Only strategy. "We hit their core," Reyes said, his voice calm but firm. "Not the fleets. Not the outposts. Their command network, their central processing. We cut it off and the body falls." Captain Nadir, his second-in-command, frowned. "That is deep in Cathar space, beyond anything we have ever attempted." "Most will not survive," Reyes nodded. "Most may die, yes. But if we do nothing, all will die eventually. This is the only chance to stop them." The plan was simple in its logic, but terrifying in its execution. A small human-led fleet would infiltrate the heart of Cathar territory, bypassing patrols, navigating asteroid fields, and using every decoy and trick they had learned over months of fighting. The strike teams would board enemy vessels, disable key systems, and finally plant devices that could disrupt the Cathar's central network. The human crews trained relentlessly. Simulations ran continuously, testing every possible scenario. Engineers worked to modify weapons, shields, and engines, finding ways to push beyond their ship's normal limits. Soldiers drilled tirelessly, practicing boarding maneuvers, zero-gravity combat, and emergency repairs. Every human aboard the fleet knew the risks. Many would not return, and yet none wavered. Finally, the day came. The fleet departed from the last coalition staging point, moving silently into the darkness. Other worlds watched in silence, hoping against hope that this small force could accomplish what no one else had dared attempt. As they entered Cathar space, tension gripped the human crews. Sensors detected enemy patrols, automated drones, and massive warships far superior in firepower. Every system they passed was a gauntlet of danger. Yet Reyes's orders remained simple. Stay calm. Stay unpredictable. Move fast. The first contact came sooner than expected. A Kethar scouting group had detected the fleet's approach. But humans had learned from months of fighting. Using asteroid fields as cover, they deployed false signals, sending the Kethar chasing shadows while the real ships slipped through. Explosions erupted as mines hidden in asteroids detonated, disabling enemy vessels before they could react. The fleet moved deeper. Each system was a battlefield. Boarding teams attacked Kethar control vessels, fighting in dark corridors where only small emergency lights illuminated their path. Marines used compact tools to destroy key circuits, planting charges that would cripple the network from within. Enemy machines adapted quickly, but the humans adapted faster. Every crew member understood the stakes. Failure was extinction. Amid the chaos, small victories inspired hope. A boarding team successfully seized a command vessel and transmitted the control codes back to human engineers. Another squad disabled a massive energy relay, forcing a Kethar detachment to retreat. Even minor triumphs in the heart of enemy space sent ripples across the fleet, fueling morale. But losses were heavy. Entire crews vanished in zero-gravity explosions. Ships that had carried families and hopes were shredded by enemy fire. Messages from these lost crews reached the horizon, calm and steady even in their final moments. "We fight for all of you," one message read. "Do not give up. Keep moving forward." Reyes watched these messages silently. He knew the human fleet was paying the ultimate price, yet their courage inspired not only the Coalition, but also every species that had given up hope. Humanity's actions were changing the galaxy, showing that survival depended not just on strength but on determination, ingenuity, and the refusal to surrender. The decisive moment came at the Kethar core itself, a massive artificial world that pulsed with energy. Its surface was lined with towers, energy conduits, and automated defenses. The humans approached cautiously, knowing that any misstep could end the mission. Using every tactic they had learned, they infiltrated the perimeter. Mines, decoys, and stealth maneuvers allowed small teams to reach the surface, while the fleet engaged the outer defenses, drawing enemy fire away from the boarding parties. Inside the core, human engineers worked frantically. Systems hummed with a mechanical rhythm, complex beyond anything the humans had encountered before. Yet they did not hesitate. Using improvised hacking tools and carefully placed disruptors, they began dismantling the central network. Every second mattered. Every mistake could cost lives. The Kethar responded with brutal efficiency. Automated drones attacked, trying to crush the human teams. Yet the humans fought with everything they had. Where others would have fled in panic, they held their ground. Every strike, every move was calculated, unpredictable, and relentless. They refused to yield. Finally, after what seemed like endless hours, the disruptors activated. Energy readings shifted. The Kethar core began to falter. Ships across the system reported systems shutting down, signals vanishing, and defenses collapsing. The endless tide of the enemy had been broken, not through sheer force, but through courage, ingenuity, and defiance. As the fleet withdrew, battered but triumphant, the galaxy watched in awe. Worlds that had been silent for months began to broadcast messages again. Refugees returned to their colonies. The Coalition rallied its scattered forces, inspired by the humans' example. Humanity had not only survived, they had led the charge that changed the course of the war. In the aftermath, Admiral Reyes sent a final message to the surviving Coalition leaders. "Your people are alive. Your worlds are safe for now. But the fight is not over. We have proven that the Kethar can be defeated. Remember this courage. Remember what is possible when you refuse to give up. Humanity will continue to stand, but the galaxy must now stand with us." On distant worlds, survivors listened. They had witnessed despair, then hope, then courage beyond anything they had imagined. Humanity's fire in the void had shown them that even the darkest night could be pierced by determination. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Kethar forces paused, stunned by the unexpected defiance of a species they had underestimated. For the first time, the unstoppable machine race had encountered an opponent that refused to bow. And that opponent was human. The galaxy was no longer silent. For months, hope had returned in small bursts, carried by the courage of humanity and their allies. Systems that had been abandoned now flickered with life again. Trade routes, once dangerous and empty, were patrolled not just by human ships but by fleets of every species that had survived the Cathar advance. The coalition was healing, but the war was far from over. The Cathar still existed, still hunted, still pressed forward, but for the first time, the galaxy refused to kneel. Admiral Rhea stood on the bridge of the flagship Horizon, looking at the stars through reinforced viewing glass. Each point of light was a world that had survived, a civilization that had endured because humans had answered the call. The memory of those who had been lost pressed heavily on his mind. Entire crews, entire ships had vanished during the strike on the Cathar core. Yet their sacrifice had not been in vain. The core was disabled, the enemy's advance slowed, and countless lives had been saved. Humanity's influence was now undeniable. While other species had once doubted them, now fleets trained alongside human squadrons and young officers studied human tactics. The humans had shown that courage, ingenuity, and unwavering determination could turn the tide, even against an enemy designed for perfection and destruction. They had reminded the galaxy of something nearly forgotten, that hope was a weapon as strong as any cannon. The first step toward true recovery was rebuilding the shattered coalition. Representatives of countless worlds gathered on a neutral station, orbiting a star far from the ruined systems. There, the leaders who had once quarreled over surrender now met in shared purpose. The humans did not dominate the meeting, nor did they demand credit. Instead, they offered guidance and shared what they had learned. Coordination, courage, and unity were stronger than any individual fleet. For many leaders, it was humbling. "We had forgotten what it meant to fight for each other," said a counselor from the world of Talira. "The humans have reminded us." Even as the coalition began to reorganize, humanity remained vigilant. They had learned that victory was not only about defeating an enemy, it was about protecting those who could not protect themselves. Human fleets continued to patrol the outer systems, searching for remaining Cathar forces and preventing surprise attacks. Every mission was dangerous, yet every crew knew why they were there. One of the most significant moments came on a world called Rithara, a mining planet that had been almost entirely destroyed. Humans led a combined operation to rebuild the colony's infrastructure. Engineers, soldiers, and volunteers worked together, repairing power grids, clearing debris, and re-establishing communication networks. Children who had known only fear now played in the open streets, laughing and exploring as if for the first time. Seeing the joy on their faces, one human officer whispered to his friend, "This is why we fight. Not for glory, not for medals, but for them." The humans' presence inspired courage across other worlds. Refugees returned, markets reopened, and trade resumed. The galaxy that had once seemed doomed was now alive again. Even species that had suffered unimaginable losses found themselves participating in rebuilding efforts, encouraged by human example. They shared technology, resources, and knowledge, creating bonds that had been broken for centuries, yet the Cathar were not gone. Small fleets and automated drones still lurked in uncharted systems, seeking to strike where defenses were weak. Humanity and the coalition did not underestimate them. Scouts were deployed, sensors monitored deep space, and contingency plans were made. But now there was confidence instead of fear. The galaxy had learned a lesson the humans had taught it. Despair could be met with defiance, and even the strongest enemy could be challenged. One evening, aboard the Horizon, Admiral Reyes addressed the fleet. His voice was broadcast not only to humans but to allied ships across the sector. "We have survived what many thought impossible. We have fought against a force that seemed unstoppable, and we have shown the galaxy that unity and courage are stronger than fear. But this is only the beginning. We must continue to protect each other. We must continue to inspire hope. The Cathar may return, but we will be ready. Together we are unstoppable." The fleet responded with a chorus of cheers and signals, a declaration that the galaxy was awake again, that it would no longer cower in silence. Across countless systems, people listened to the message and felt something they had not felt for a long time. Strength, hope, the belief that survival and freedom were not impossible. Stories of humanity's courage spread quickly, told in towns, colonies, and stations, and even among species who had never seen a human in person. They spoke of humans who had risked everything to save others, of small ships that had outsmarted mighty fleets, and of leaders who had refused to bow to despair. On Earth, celebrations were quiet but heartfelt. The people understood the weight of the sacrifice. Every life lost had been a story, a family, a future that would now live on because others had answered the call. Schools taught young children the story of the galaxy's darkest days and how humanity had stepped forward. Children drew pictures of the ships, the battles, and the brave crews, imagining themselves as part of a force that refused to give up. Humanity had changed the galaxy. What had begun as a small response to a distress call had grown into a movement of courage and defiance. Planets once ready to surrender had taken up arms, engineers had shared knowledge freely, and young pilots now studied human tactics as a model of strategy and bravery. Where despair had lived, hope now flourished, and so the galaxy looked to the future. The coalition rebuilt stronger, not just through fleets and weapons, but through unity and shared purpose. Humanity remained at the forefront, but not as rulers or conquerors, simply as a species that had refused to remain silent when all others had. They were the spark that had reignited the galaxy's fire. The Cathar forces, scattered and weakened, would eventually regroup. They were persistent, relentless, and dangerous, yet the galaxy would be ready this time. It would face the darkness not with fear but with determination, courage, and cooperation. The story of humanity's defiance would inspire generations to come. A reminder that no matter how hopeless a situation seemed, the courage to act could change everything. Finally, Admiral Reyes looked out at the stars once more. The void was still vast and danger still existed, but it was no longer silent. Humanity had answered the call, and in doing so, they had shown the galaxy that even the smallest spark could light a fire strong enough to banish the darkness. For the first time in many cycles, the stars felt alive, and humanity, standing firm among them, had proven one undeniable truth. When hope seems lost, courage and unity can bring a new dawn. The galaxy had survived. The coalition had survived. Humanity had survived, and together they would ensure that the light of hope would never fade again. The city of New Carthage lay in ruins. Broken towers stood like the bones of forgotten giants, their steel frames twisted and bent. Dust moved slowly in the empty streets, stirred only by the wind that carried the faint sound of rusted signs creaking. To the conquerors who ruled the skies, this was proof of victory. To them, humanity had fallen long ago, but beneath the surface, under the cracked stone and broken glass, life still moved. In the tunnels below the city, a small community lived in silence. They had no banners, no armies, and no machines of war. What they had were stories, tools, and the will to keep breathing. For centuries, humans had been told they were finished, that they would never rise again. The conquerors watched the surface and saw nothing but ruins. They never looked below. A boy named Jalen sat by a flickering lamp in one of those tunnels. The lamp was old, made from scavenged parts, but it gave just enough light for him to see the pages of an ancient book. His grandmother had guarded the book for years, telling him it carried more power than any weapon. The book spoke of times when humans walked freely under their own skies, when their ships traveled through stars, and when their voices filled great halls with songs. Jalen turned the pages slowly. His hands were rough from work, his clothes patched again and again, but his eyes were alive with curiosity. Around him, others worked quietly, mending clothes, repairing old machines, or sharing food. The air smelled of oil, bread, and smoke. There was little, but there was enough. On the surface, the alien patrols moved in straight lines. Their ships hovered silently, watching from above with cold blue lights. The conquerors did not speak to humans anymore. They had spoken only once, centuries ago, declaring that Earth now belonged to them. After that silence, to them humanity was no more dangerous than insects. But in the tunnels, whispers spread. They spoke of other hidden places. Villages in the forests, shelters in the mountains, outposts in the deserts. They spoke of travelers who carried messages between them, risking everything to bring news. Slowly, these whispers became threads, and those threads began to weave something larger. Old Marin, the eldest in Jalen's community, often sat by the fire at night. His voice was cracked but steady. He told the children stories not of fear but of memory. "Listen," he would say, pointing to the ceiling where faint rumbles of alien ships could sometimes be heard. "They believe they have silenced us. They believe we are broken, but silence is not death. Silence is waiting, and waiting is strength." The children listened with wide eyes, and even the adults paused their work. For in those words they heard something stronger than orders or laws. They heard hope. One evening, a traveler arrived. His name was Rico, and he carried a satchel filled with old papers and a small rusted device. His boots were torn from long journeys, but his face carried a tired smile. He was welcomed with food and water, though there was little to spare. Once he had rested, he opened his satchel. Inside were maps drawn by hand, showing tunnels, forests, and broken highways across vast distances. More important than the maps were the stories he carried. "I have seen the mountains," Rico said softly as the community gathered around. "And in the mountains there are people who build with stone and wood. They raise towers not for war but for watching the stars. They believe the stars still belong to us." Gasps filled the room. The stars were a forbidden subject. The conquerors kept the skies closed, their ships guarding every horizon. Yet the thought of looking upward, of daring to dream of the stars, lit sparks in every heart. Jalen leaned closer. His grandmother's hand rested on his shoulder, steady but firm. She wanted him to listen carefully, to remember every word. Rico continued, "I have also seen the deserts. Their families gather around machines buried in sand. They say those machines are older than the war, older than the conquerors. They speak of power hidden in the ground, waiting for hands brave enough to use it." The whispers grew louder after that night. Every tunnel hummed with quiet talk. Every heart carried a secret flame. Humanity was not gone. It was scattered, yes, but not gone. On the surface, the conquerors never saw the change. They flew their ships over empty streets and believed the silence meant victory. They saw no armies, no weapons, no noise. To them, silence was defeat. But they had never lived as humans did. They did not understand that silence could also mean preparation. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Jalen grew restless. He wanted to see the world outside, to see the ruins not as the conquerors showed them, but as they truly were. His grandmother warned him to be careful, but she did not stop him. She knew the time for hiding forever would one day end. So one gray morning, Jalen climbed a broken staircase and emerged into the ruined city. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of rust and stone. Above, the sky stretched wide, with alien ships gliding silently across it. He ducked into shadows, moving slowly, his heart pounding with every step. He saw broken towers covered in vines. He saw streets where plants grew through cracks in the stone. Nature had begun to take back what humans had once built. But to Jalen, it was not only decay, it was proof of survival. The earth itself had not given up. From the corner of his eye, he saw other humans moving quietly. They carried baskets, tools, and sometimes children. They did not walk in fear. They walked in silence, heads down, but their eyes still glowed with determination. Jalen realized something then. Humanity had not fallen. Humanity had learned to move like rivers under ice, hidden but always flowing. When he returned to the tunnels, he told his grandmother what he had seen. She nodded, her eyes shining. "Yes," she said softly. "We wait, but one day the silence will break. And when it breaks, the world will remember who we are." That night, as Jalen lay in the dim light of the lamp, he turned again to the book in his hands. The pages whispered of freedom, of ships that touched the stars, of voices that once spoke across worlds. He did not know how or when, but he believed those pages would come alive again. For the conquerors above, silence was victory. But for humanity below, silence was the beginning of something greater. The quiet silence was not the end. It was only the waiting before the rise.